So that's 2 days before you guys head down to Ganjgal.
We'd actually got the call that night that we were supposed to go to Ganjgal on the 7th, and they ended up pushing it right to the 8th. So we left the next day.
You talk about it a little bit here. Ganjgal lay 2 miles north of Joyce, and we drove right by the mouth of the valley. Ganjgal sounded like the name of an Irish town full of smiling faces and friendly pubs. I could see a few of the larger compounds far back on a hillside nestled against steep ridge lines. Bad place, Hafez muttered. Bad people. So you're getting right away getting told by Hafez.
I mean, we were told instantly. I mean, we were told yeah, there was no doubt.
Now, one thing that I think made you feel a little bit more comfortable, you talk about in the book, historically the Taliban had not sprung ambushes from inside villages. So that wasn't discussed at the briefing. Plus, we were going in with 90 Afghans and 15 advisors with a platoon from 132 deployed behind us in a quick reaction force. This show belongs to our Afghan counterparts. Fabio, am I saying that right?
Yeah, Fabio.
Fabio said, "We advisors will stand off to the side and let them talk with the elders. We're not in the lead, we're assisting." That made no sense, I thought, considering who was doing the briefing and who was hearing it. We were in the tactical lead, even if we claimed otherwise. That's a political thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an ignorance thing.
Well, I think it's an ignorant thing too, but the reason it happens...
No, of course. I mean, technically we fail under... So, technically the way that this works, as crazy as this sounds, I was working for, like, my commander was the Afghan commander. Mm-hmm. Whatever the Afghan commander told me was what I was supposed to do.
Right. And I'm saying that's a political thing for us to say politically, look, the Afghans are running this operation.
Yes. I mean, that, but that... if you remember what I said a little bit earlier about, hey, we're not going to do the fighting. I mean, that's the mentality of the leadership of the team.
Yeah. Yeah. Not good. And as you just said here, that made no sense, I thought. And you were a corporal. 20, how old were you?
I was 21.
21 years old. And you're looking at this going, hey, man, this doesn't make any sense. We're the ones that are sitting here briefing it. Yeah. We're the ones that know how to call for fire.
Yeah, I mean, and first off, the Afghans can't even talk to anybody that calls for fire or the helicopters. I mean, they don't even have any comms with them. They're on HF. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, so the three main factors that I brought up in the brief, and I brought up that, look, everybody's going in. We have over 12 different moving elements between the OPs and different teams inside this patrol, all on one frequency. Mm-hmm. I brought that up. I brought up the fact that we didn't have direct air support. It was on 15-minute strip alert, and that's in Jalalabad. So so they were taking it as if the birds would be there within 15 minutes. I said that's not what 15-minute strip alert means.
They're up.
That means off the ground in 15 minutes, and then they still got probably 60 minutes to get from Jalalabad to us. And so that was the other factor. And then the other thing that I brought up was why would we put our snipers 2,000 meters away from the village?
Outside of their effective range of their weapons.
There you go. But here's what I was told. I'm an E4 in the United States Marine Corps. What do I know about mission planning? And that's why I was taken out of the team.
Check. So when you talk about getting taken out of the team, explain how that went down a little bit. So you got your 4-man team, Team Monty.
Yeah, Team Monty. And so what they did is they had... There's they would put the teams, you would go with your Afghans in here to do their part. So our team was supposed to go to the back of the village, cover the back side of it, and then we were going to search a couple houses up there for a machine gun. And while the meeting went on, and they took me out of the team because I brought up those concerns, and they kind of took it as me going against the orders, questioning their authority, and they replaced me with Gunny Johnson.
So I just have to say this right now. So I talk about this all the time, man. If you're in a leadership position, you don't want yes men. You don't want yes men. You want the corporal that says, hey boss, I don't understand why you do that right now. And if your answer to your subordinate is because I said so, or it's you're an E4, be quiet, or you're an E5, be quiet. If that's what your answer is, that means you don't have a real answer. That means that what you're doing is probably wrong. So surround yourself. The best people you can have on your team are the people that are going to question what it is that your plan is. And if they question it and you don't have a good logical answer and your plan doesn't stand on its own 2 feet, well, think about it and reassess it and take some advice from down the chain of command on how what we could do to change this plan up.
Yeah, I mean, they're complacent. You know, that's the type of mentality that you have when you don't expect to go get your ass handed to you. That's why you need to expect to get your ass handed to you every day and train like it. Yeah.
You know, I used to, when I was running training, we trained for worst case scenario all the time. It was like worst. I mean, you know what? And it was insane. Like we had great financing for our training, so the training was awesome. We had mayhem going on. We had paintballs and we had this multi-million-dollar laser tag system. We had role players and it was awesome. And I wanted mayhem, and we would put guys down and you'd have to carry them out, and it'd be mayhem. And sometimes guys go, this is kind of unrealistic, and what are the chances of this really happening?
Yeah.
And I'd be like, look, if this doesn't happen, great. You don't ever have to worry about it happening for real. But if it happens, you'll be ready for it, at least as ready as you can be.
Yeah.
So you get pulled off the team.
I got pulled off the team, and my job was going to be to stay with the vehicles. So, like, basically we were going to drive vehicles in, park the vehicles, and that was the other thing I said. I said, this is dumb. Why would we leave our up-armored guns a couple miles away?
Mm-hmm.
And they said, you ready for the response here? You ready? Well, Dakota, because we want to go into the village clandestine, you have a 90-man patrol.
Yeah, that's not going to happen. Just to paint a picture for everyone, basically there's a deep ravine, walls on either side. At the top of the ravine, it kind of splits into 2 other ravines, and there's kind of villages on both sides of that.
Yeah, it splits into 2, like it's kind of like 2 valleys inside of a big valley.
Right.
And on the right-hand side was another bad valley, but we were going in the left-hand side, and that was Ganjgal. And, I mean, this terrain was built to fight. It was built to fight. I mean, they had trenches in it. There were trenches in it that they used to fight out of. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's nuts.
And obviously you're walking up the valley, which means automatically you're in the low ground, which is not where we want to be ever. All right. Now one of the guys you were going to be working with in the Hummers was Staff Sergeant Juan Rodriguez Chavez. Here we go, back to the book. I sought out Staff Sergeant Juan Rodriguez Chavez, our motor transport chief. I'd known him for 5 months. He didn't stand on rank, and we traded stories about growing up on farms. He had grown up on a ranch in Mexico. Having a similar approach to life, Rod and I had become friends. He was in the 8th grade when his family moved to Texas, where he learned English, played football, earned good grades, and roped cows and rodeos. Our team called him Hot Rod. He laughed a lot, bragged about how smart his 2 daughters were, and kept all our vehicles in top condition. Rod, this mission is fucked up. If the shit hits the fan, I said, we're going in. My team's walking point, and they'll get cut off. We have to go in and get them out. And he looked back at you. Devil dog, Rod said, say the word, and I'll do the driving.
Yeah.
That's legit.
He's the man. He is the man.
And continuing on, you say, having some sort of contingency plan. Now I walked back to the advisor headquarters and briefed Lieutenant Johnson. By the way, Lieutenant Johnson didn't want you out of the team either, right? He wanted you to stay with him.
Kennefic were pissed.
He knew that you should be with the team.
Yeah.
If things get hairy, I said, I'm coming in. Rod will drive. Radio your coordinates and get down to the wash. Fucking climb in and we'll haul ass back to the main body, because they were going to be exposed on the far end of that wash.
Yeah, so so everything that I did was planned out the night before.
Check.
Everything that I did was planned out the night before, and it was all in our team. I told him, I said, you say the word and I'll head in there. I don't care. And I'm coming to get you. And that we had this all planned out. Like, all they had to do was get to the road and I would be there.
Continuing on, back to the book. In the talk, a report about Ganjgal had come in via brigade internet. A special forces team reported that 32 fighters were moving from Pakistan to reinforce Ganjgal. Half an hour later, the video feed from an unmanned aerial vehicle showed a man with a mortar tube on his back entering a known safe house 2 kilometers north of Ganjgal village. 10 minutes later, 4 more men entered the same house. So you're watching this.
Well, so here's the crazy part. Nobody told us.
Oh, so you didn't even get that report?
Nobody told us.
Check. And I got to point out to everyone, I'm obviously skipping giant chunks of this book, and there's an awesome amount of detail that Dakota goes into in how this is going down, and I'm kind of hitting the wave tops to get the story there. But okay, you don't even get that intel, but it doesn't matter because the next day, guess where you're going? Into the valley. You got a guy with you named Swenson. He's in charge of some border police, some Afghan border police. Is that right?
Yeah.
So Swenson's border police turned to Hafez when the lights went out. Dushman, he said. Am I saying that right? Dushman?
Yeah,
Dushman. Dushman, which is another term for
enemy.
For enemy. Dushman. They said, we must turn back. So they're already freaking out.
Yeah. So I think that they were some of the police had already knew. They had leaked it.
Tipped it off?
Yep. They had
or
leaked,
they had information one way or the other.
They had leaked when we were coming in. They had leaked the plan.
Yeah.
So I think that's why they were trying to bail out, in my opinion, was because they knew what was already there.
Yeah. Got it. And just before 5 a.m, Rod and I heard gravel crunching on the trail. So now you're actually in position. You dropped off the guys, and now the Afghan team with some of the advisors, including Team Monty, are heading up the valley, and you're waiting at the bottom end of the valley.
Yeah, I'm sitting back at the back at the trucks, and they're going into the valley, and at this point now everybody's leaving the valley. Yeah,
this part. Just before 5 a.m, Rod and I heard gravel crunching on the trail. Men, women, children, sheep, and goats suddenly hurried by our trucks heading out of the valley. Pre-dawn always brought the first sing-song call to prayer, followed by people scurrying about. And this is just, you knew right then, right?
Oh,
100% that it's on.
No, 110%. Yeah, no doubt.
So this, just for anyone that's listening that isn't putting 2 and 2 together here, there's a village with a bunch of civilians in it, and the civilians all leave, and they take their animals with them.
They take everything that's worth anything with them.
So they know that it's on. Going back to the book, as Lieutenant Johnson approached the first row of houses, he radioed back to Garza that he and Lieutenant Rula were heading toward the house of an imam, one of the village elders. Seconds later, an RPG streaked in from the east, followed by a burst of PKM, a Russian-made machine gun that shoots a hefty 7.62 millimeter cartridge. It started tearing up the ground and the adobe walls. As the men took cover among the terrace walls, more PKM fire came in from the northeast, joined by AKs at a closer range. Enemy fighters were crouched inside the houses and below the windows of the schoolhouse on the southern ridge. They were hiding in the alleyways and dug in behind the stone terrace walls to the east. They had a dozen fixed positions and were shooting downhill with the sun behind them.
Yeah, they knew what they were doing.
Yeah, this is again, anybody with any kind of military knowledge whatsoever, when you read that paragraph or those 2 paragraphs right there, you see that you are in a horrible scenario. Multiple enemy machine gun positions in elevated, coordinated attack.
Yeah.
Horrible. And here's your thoughts. Back to the book. I waited for the firing to die down, but it didn't. The chaos of the RPG explosions, PKM machine guns, AKs, and M16s increased. I heard the report of a recoilless rifle, basically a 100-pound shoulder or tripod-mounted cannon, and a sure sign of a planned ambush as the Dushman don't lug that over the hills for an exercise. Then I heard the crump of their mortar shells. There was a wide babble of voices on the command radio, advisors yelling at each other to clear the net. No one was taking charge. There was no central command. I was pacing around, frustrated, being out of the fight and not being able to help. So you'd seen enough of like little firefights that would be a little burst of fire and then people are going to run away.
Yeah, I mean, like they're going to just, they blow their load like right in the beginning, and then, they don't have enough. They're not able to, like us, resupply. Mm-hmm. They don't sustain anything. This was endless.
And then you mentioned this earlier, and again, just to kind of point out to people so they understand what you were talking about. You said, hey, there's going to be 14 different maneuver elements?
12, yeah.
12 different maneuver elements, and they're all on the same net. Now, what that means is they're all on the same radio frequency. So picture this. You're trying to have a conversation on the phone, but so are 12 other people, 11 other people, all trying to have a conversation on the phone at the same time.
Yeah, with their nerves. With
their nerves while chaos is happening.
Yeah.
And so this is what you end up doing is actually on a phone, you have a better chance because a phone will kind of let some of that traffic through, but when you start stepping on each other on the radio, they just cut each other off and you can't hear anything.
And that's exactly what happened. And the other piece of it was, it's not just that, it was all that one frequency, everything had to be relayed through those snipers to get back.
Because they were in the elevated high ground.
Yeah.
To get back to did you have direct comms with the guys on the ground?
Yes, I did,
Okay.
But I'm saying like to get to the command. So if you
talk.
like, and the big thing I brought up was what happens if you're calling in a medevac and you're calling in a call for fire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're trying to that's like trying to call the fire department and the ambulance and you're trying to call them at the same time. Like you gotta separate them.
Yes.
Actually, that's not a good example. It's trying to call the ambulance and an active shooter and trying to maneuver all that stuff happening at the same time.
Yeah.
Back to the book. Soon both ridge lines were sparkling with fire as the Askars and Dushmen engaged each other with rocket-propelled grenades. Smoke and shrapnel filled the air. Swenson, he's on. This is Highlander 6, he yelled over the din. Forward line of troops pinned down at X-ray Delta. Heavy enemy fire. Request immediate suppression. Fire Kilo Echo. Will adjust. So he's trying to call fire. You're back, and Rod says, what do you think? Rod said, if the Dushmen cut around the rear, I said, and close the back door, they'll catch our people in a fire sack. This is deep shit. They got to get out of there. The way to break up an ambush is to hammer it with heavy fire. The Humvee gave us armor, mobility, and a heavy gun. We would roll in and bring Team Monty back to the location of the command group. I grabbed the radio and called Fox 3, Lieutenant Fabio. No reply. I tried Fox 6, Williams, and then Fox 9, First Sergeant Garza. No one replied. I was calling for permission to enter the valley, asking for it from anyone who would answer. Finally, Fox 7, Valdez, up on the northern ridge, answered on the net. Fox 3-3, your requests to enter the valley are denied. Fox 9 says you are to stay at your present location. And again, I'm throwing out a bunch of different names here. These are all the different leaders that are out there on these different 12 elements. And when you read the book for yourself, you can kind of catch and understand exactly what was happening there. But the basically what was going on was you're calling whoever would answer to get permission to drive up the valley and go give a hand.
Yeah, I was trying to get permission.
I put down the handset and sat there, listening as a dozen advisors tried to talk over a single radio channel. It was sheer bedlam. This is bullshit, Rod. I rechecked the ammo belt in the Mark 19. Rod sat in the driver's seat. You ready, Rod? Give it a few more minutes, Meyer. You'll fry for this, he said. He was right. I'd get sent home for disobeying a direct order. There was no question in my mind about that. I was already on thin ice with Garza, Fabio, and Williams, so I sat there frustrated listening to the shooting, flexing my hands on the grips of the Mark 19 and breathing hard. I tried to calm down. Maybe the battle sounded worse on the radio than it really was. Son of a bitch. Inside the Tactical Operations Center at Joyce, so Joyce is a couple miles away, and the Tactical Operations Center is where they're running this. They're supposed to have kind of situational awareness of everything that's happening, and they're supposed to be able to supply fire support. So that's when we're talking about the Tactical Operations Center at Joyce, that's what it is. Captain Aaron Harding was the senior officer on duty from midnight to 8 in the morning, the battle captain. He had been in Afghanistan for 8 months, but had rarely controlled fires, and certainly none like this. As artillery stood by at Joyce, a few miles away, and at Asadabad, a few miles away, Harding asked for more and more information from the men on the long table. Who was requesting the fire missions? Was it Shadow 4, Highlander 5, or Fox 3? What had they heard from Fox 6? Who was presently in charge? The Marine advisors or the Afghan army? Did the ground commander know where all his troops were? Had they double-checked the grids of the KEs? He asked question after question. At Joyce, 120 millimeter mortars were fired 15 minutes after Fabio requested. The first shell, though, struck within 50 meters of the enemy position. The next flurry of shells was on target. That would be the only effective fire mission of the entire day. And this is one of the things that you're going to get more into. We actually recently talked about the battle in the Idrang Valley, and those guys would absolutely 100% have been overrun, and what saved their ass over and over again was artillery and fire support.
Yeah.
That's the biggest advantage that we have on the battlefield as Americans.
100%.
And your team is calling for it. The advisors are calling for it. And they're not getting it.
Yeah, we're not getting it. I mean, they shut it down. And to try to give the benefit of the doubt here, right, of why they shut it down, I totally understand it. But it goes back to the one thing I said, right? I mean, they probably couldn't figure out who the hell was calling what and where what was where. I mean, I don't know that I could have confidently fired a round. But part of it was because of the layout of everybody on one frequency. Mm-hmm. You know, it goes back to that initial problem. Like, I don't know if I could have fired a round. Now, am I pissed that they didn't fire rounds? Absolutely. Like, it was wrong. It was wrong for the reasons they did it. But, you know, the confusion was so chaotic in the beginning, especially. But I can tell you this, that if they had got the rounds, it'd have broke the enemy.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, again, to advance your point of giving the benefit of the doubt, if they have no idea where friendlies are, they could have fired rounds on friendly forces as well.
Well, exactly, and then, you know, they'd have been accountable for that.
And I'll tell you, that's a hard decision to make. To possibly, you know, fratricide, blue on blue is in my opinion, that's, you know, it's like the worst thing that can happen in war. And so what these guys are being asked to possibly do is risk a fratricide.
Yes.
Which in their minds, and probably a lot of military minds, I think mine included, well, it's hard to say, what's better? You know, risk fratricide or risk getting overrun? Now, if we know for a fact people are getting overrun, then you're like, okay, we'll risk fratricide. And that's why that happens sometimes where people say, drop that bomb no matter what. But to say, I'm not 100% sure people are going to go overrun, but I'm still going to take the risk of fratricide. At this point, that's probably why they're holding off.
It is in the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
they get to a point where they call the danger close rounds and try and take responsibility, and we'll get there. Back to the book. The enemy above worked their way around the edges of the valley, shooting downhill. The Taliban machine gunners tracked in on one Askar, then another, then another. It was a killing ground. They're all over the place. Swenson was thinking to himself, I may not make it out of here. If you hunker down and don't shoot back, you will surely die. The other side gains confidence and rushes forward. In the frenzy of combat, soldiers act like sharks. They sense weakness and circle in, picking off the wounded and the defenseless. Slowly, the douchmen were closing in from both sides of the wash. So they were ready.
Oh, let me tell you something. They were good. They were good. They were trained. They had gear. You know, mm-hmm. they had plate carriers. Mm-hmm. They were taking the uniforms off our dead guys. You know, they put Kevlars on and shit. They were good.
Still trying to get fire support here. Swenson had identified enemy positions at 4 grid positions. There are 2 basic ways of calling in artillery. You can give the grid coordinates of the target or the Kilo Echo number for a grid and adjust after the initial round, or you can give your own location and a compass bearing and distant to the target. The second technique is called a polar mission, provides the guns with the locations of both the friendly observer and the target. Tell the TOC I'll send it polar, Swenson radioed to Kaplan. It's on me. Give them my initials. I'm making the decision, not them. Assuming accurate fire, the U.S. mortars were less than 2 miles away. The only target endangered by the polar plot was the enemy. By sending his initials, Swenson was taking full responsibility. If anything went wrong, if a friendly soldier or civilian were hit, the burden rested squarely on Swenson, not with the TOC in the rear. The TOC responded to the polar request by asking again for information that was impossible to provide. Where were all the friendly troops? What was the forward line of trace of the friendly units? Was everyone accounted for? Were any civilians endangered? Kaplan told Shadow, the relay team above him, tell the TOC that it's critical. I repeat, critical. We have advisors pinned down. The TOC denied Shadow's fire mission. Furious Sergeant Summers at Shadow 4 pressed back against the TOC. The main element is being hit from the north, east, and south. All elements are engaged. I repeat, all elements are heavily engaged. We need fire missions now. The NCOs inside the TOC were doing their job, and the artillery and mortar crews wanted to oblige, yet it seemed to Sergeant Summers that every time he relayed a fire mission, the TOC asked him 20 questions. A second string was running the show here, and not well. In firefights, it's not unusual for 200 to 2,000 artillery shells to be fired over the course of the first hour of the battle at Ganjgal. When men lay trapped and dying, the TOC at Joyce allowed only 21 artillery shells to be fired. Since World War II, forward observers had received artillery fire under the rule of silence is consent. When an observer called for fire, the mission went by radio to the operations center and to the guns. Silence by the ops center constituted consent for the guns to fire. In the 21st century, with computers making instant firing calculations, within 2 minutes shells could be hitting the target. But beginning about 2006, sergeants and lieutenants on the front lines were trusted less. The high command believed the grunts were too quick to call in fires that endangered civilians, resulting in an embittered population that supported the insurgency. The solution was to apply a strict new rule. 2 months before Ganjgal, General Stanley McChrystal, the senior commander in Afghanistan, issued a directive that forbade the use of artillery against or near any structure likely to contain civilians unless the next higher headquarters commander had approved. That ended silence is consent. The high command had shifted decision-making from the battlefield to the staff. Swenson was not trusted to make the hard decisions. Instead, officers in the TOC, with a confused idea of the battlefield, had to decide whether to honor his requests for fire.
Yeah, and so that's where my problem comes in, right? Is, if the doctrine is that I give my initials, I take the responsibility, well, then follow the doctrine.
Yeah.
There's where they went wrong.
And I'll tell you something else that, you talked about how confusing it was over the net. And clearly it was obviously very confusing. How long would it take to verbally explain the layout of this whole situation?
Uh-oh.
It would take a very long time.
Oh.
It would take an extremely eloquent person who had the time to kind of compose himself and sit there and try and explain it. That's why you make Kilo Echoes. That's why you have these pre-planned fire positions, so that you don't have to think anymore.
Yes.
We can direct fires. And what, instead of having to communicate what the situation on the ground is, what you communicate is, this is what we need. And this is where you need to put it.
Yeah, I mean, that's 100% it. I mean, that's 100% it. You could never, first off, you could never relay all that information there. And guess what? And at the end of the day, it was irrelevant to what they were needing to do.
Yeah. And also, if you could relay it, by the time you relayed it, it would be different. Because what are you going to tell everyone to sit still for a minute while I explain where you are? That doesn't work. That's why decentralized command is so important on the battlefield. This is the exact reason why decentralized command is so important on the battlefield. When you centralize command, people that actually are there, that need to be able to make decisions, make things happen, can't do it.
Yep.
And by the way, how do you overcome a situation like this? How do you overcome a situation where, okay, you're my subordinate.
Yeah.
You work for me. Mm-hmm. And I don't want you to be able to have the ability to fire because I'm afraid you're going to hurt civilians. How do I solve that? The way to solve it is not to say, no, I don't give you that authority. The way I solve it is to say, okay, Dakota, let me explain some things to you. We need to protect the civilian populace. We need to make sure we don't damage any infrastructure to the best of our ability. I want you to understand how strategically important that is. Do you understand? Let me put you through some scenarios. What if you were here and this happened? What would you do? What if you were here and this happened? What would you do? I train you and I build trust so that I can decentralize the command. That's how you overcome it. You don't overcome it. It's a shortcut to try and centralize, and it ends up getting people killed.
100%.
All right. Going back to the book, Fox 3-1, Lieutenant Johnson finally came up on the radio. We're pinned down in a house, receiving accurate fire from the next house. We have to get out of here. He was cut off by others pushing to use the same frequency. 3 or 4 advisors were trying to talk, stepping on each other. I could hear the strain in their voices, the lack of crisp orders, the frantic yelling of men who were pinned down. After a few minutes, Fox 3-2 Staff Sergeant Kennefic tried to pass his location on the grid to Fabio. I can't shoot back, Aaron said, because I'm pinned down. They're shooting at me from the house. It's so close. Grid. 3-2, this is 3-3, Radio Staff Sergeant Kennefic. Repeat your grid. Repeat your grid. Or you radioed to Kennefic. Repeat your grid. Repeat your grid. So he faded as he was trying to tell you his grid. Nothing after that but static and garbled voices. That broke it for me. I had promised my team I would be there. As far as I was concerned, my command element wasn't in command. Twice I had heard Shadow say that air would be on station in 15 minutes. Nothing happened. How long do you do nothing while your friends are fighting for their lives? Fox 7, this is 3-3. Sitting here is stupid. We're going in. Rod and I were on the net with Valdez. There was no dispute among us. It was about 0600 time to move. I was the vehicle commander, so the fault lay with me for disobeying orders if I arrived in the valley and discovered that the command group had the situation under control. I knew there was a good chance I'd be sent back to the States in disgrace. When I shouted the Askars to follow us, they looked confused. Up on the north outpost, Valdez grabbed a senior Afghan sergeant. The sergeant radioed to the Afghan drivers clustered around our truck, urging them in Pashto to follow me. Mortar shells were falling a football field away to our west. The enemy knew our trucks were somewhere on the path, but uncertain just where. The explosions made the Askars jumpy. Just the same, some of them jumped into 2 Humvees and roared into position behind us. "Rod, let's go," I said. He put it in gear. Now, by that time, you start actually going into the valley. Yeah. And as you're going in, by that time, several Askars were stumbling out of the battlefield, some bleeding, a few without their rifles, all exhausted. "Where Americani?" I yelled. "Dost, dost." The Askars pointed up toward the village. So as you're driving in, you're seeing guys fleeing the battlefield.
I mean, it was like, it was terrible. Like, as we go in, you're just seeing these guys come out, and it's in Ramadan, so they won't eat or they won't drink any water, and they're coming out of this battle, and they're just like, you're not even close to the valley yet, and they're coming out of this battle. They don't have any weapons on them. They're just broken. They're bloodied. They've been shot. You're carrying each other, and you're just like, what are we going into?
Somewhere behind us was a U.S. Army platoon. It seemed to me to be a time for them to make a move. They were the quick reaction force, our insurance policy. Valdez was on the radio arguing with Dog 36, the quick reaction Army platoon commander. Dog 36, this is Fox 7, Valdez radioed. "You need to get in there, man. Fox 33 is to your front in a Humvee. Drive east until you link up with him." "Fox 7, this is Dog 36, said the lieutenant. "Our vehicles are too big for the mission." We were driving on a footpath that was barely wide enough for our Humvee. Valdez came up with an alternative. "Dog 36, this is Fox 7. I understand. Drive forward until you reach the Afghan vehicles. Use them to get into the fight. There are people out there dying." The platoon leader said he had to wait for clearance from the talk at Joyce.
Yeah.
What kind of vehicles did the QRF have?
They were in MRAPs.
Okay. God, I mean,
it was an excuse.
Yeah, how awesome would it be to have an MRAP roll into this situation? With
and I don't think they could have. The road wouldn't have held up.
Too small?
Yeah, because they ended up coming in one of those, it looks like a tank, but it's on wheels. Mm-hmm. And it ended up flipping over off the bank. But they look, at the end of the day, we had a ton of Humvees. I mean, we just brought in 90 people sitting right there. Mm-hmm. They could have jumped in the Humvees and came.
The helicopter ops center called back, saying the retasking of the birds had been canceled because Lance had not called his own brigade headquarters to ask permission, and because another mission north of Ganjgal was of higher priority. So One of the guys in the ops center had actually said, "You know what? Screw it. I'm calling for helos." But he hadn't called the brigade and run through the proper chain of command, and they shut him down.
Yeah.
So here we go. More than an hour into the fight, the situation was as follows. Team Monty was trapped in a house, and the U.S. and Afghan commanders were pinned down by shooters closing in on them from 3 sides. The north and south observation posts were under fire. The Askars were caught in the open with nowhere to hide. Rod and I hadn't reached the wash. The 132 quick reaction platoon was not quick reacting. The talk at Joyce was paralyzed, preventing artillery support, and the helicopter gunships had not arrived.
It was a perfect storm.
Damn. That's just there's nothing else can go wrong right now.
It's a perfect storm. It is the absolute perfect storm.
Swenson wanted a massive artillery barrage. Because the douchemen didn't have overhead cover, artillery airbursts would send millions of lancets raining down toward them. Hundreds of shells had to shake the mountains and roll thunder down the valley. The douchemen were zealots, but they weren't crazy. Once artillery began exploding overhead, gunmen with AKs wouldn't get up and run forward in the open. Yet the TOC refused to fire at Ganjgal, only a few miles from Camp Joyce. Unleashing a barrage in your own backyard wouldn't win any applause at higher headquarters. The directive from the high command was so clear: do not employ air-to-ground or indirect fires against residential compounds defined as any structure or building known or likely to contain civilians unless the ground force commander has verified that no civilians are present.
Terrible. And I mean, and there's that, that rule right there is written so impossible. What do? The village you're getting shot at, so you run through there and you civilian, or you shoot at me?
Yeah. I have to do like a full review of the ROEs or the specific directive, but normally the self-defense thing trumps everything.
Well, usually, and that's what I always say, right? I always talk about ROEs, and ROEs will say blah 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 blah, but then at the end of it, it always ends. It says or hostile act, hostile intent.
Mm-hmm.
But it's all by interpretation. I mean, that it goes back to the commanders. I mean, I don't blame the ROE that Stanley McChrystal put in place for what happened that day. I blame the people, the leadership, who was incompetent to make a decision. You know what I mean? Like it's like nobody wants to just own it and take accountability and take responsibility and say, you know what? I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do. They want to be able to say, well, I didn't do it because, well, this is the order.
Mm.
Come on. If you're in a leadership position, take responsibility.
Yeah. You got to do the right thing. That's the bottom line, and that's what makes leadership hard. And sometimes the right thing is to break rules. Sometimes the right thing is to not follow orders. Sometimes orders are wrong, and you shouldn't follow them. And Napoleon said, if you're in charge and you get tasked with something that's wrong and you execute it, you're culpable. Doesn't matter if you get ordered or not. Sometimes you break the rules. Going right back to the yes man thing, right? Yeah. And I guarantee the intent of Stan McChrystal putting this ROE in place wasn't to deny guys that were pinned down by enemy fire. But again, how are we communicating it? And are we putting the priorities in place correctly so that everybody knows? Yeah, I mean,
when it's put out in an email, it's kind of like it's as dangerous as you interpreting me a text.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, everybody looks at it different.
Yep. And you know what? That's why things like commander's intent are so important.
So important.
If I know what it is, if I know what it is that you want done, and my job is to get it done, and you give me parameters to do it within, I'll stay within those parameters and I'll get the job done. And I'll come back to you and I say, hey boss, I had to bend the rules a little bit here, but I got the mission done. Or I might call you back and say, hey, I'm getting ready to break the rules to get the mission done. Do you want me to break them or not?
Yeah.
All right. Back to the book. Shadow, the Army outpost on the southern ridge, replied that the talk at Joyce said the fire mission was too close to the village. Too close to the village, Lieutenant Johnson said. If you don't give me these rounds right now, I'm gonna die. Try your best, Shadow replied, knowing the talk wouldn't fire. Try your best.
Try your best.
From the tone of Shadow's voice, I knew he was on the verge of complete rage. He wanted to strangle the officers in the talk at Joyce. I felt the same way. This couldn't be happening. We were on the same side. We weren't Marines or soldiers. We weren't Americans or Askars. We were one lone group fighting desperately to stay alive. The villagers weren't our friends. This was a war, and my team was on the verge of dying. Whose side was the talk on? Radio call after radio call, Swenson kept requesting smoke. Finally, around 0630, the talk at Joyce permitted 4 white phosphorus rounds to be fired into the southeast backside of the village, too far away to conceal my team. Those were the last rounds fired during the battle. At about 0640, the talk at Joyce forbade any more artillery support, citing garbled communications, incomplete calls for fire procedures, and a lack of situational awareness on the part of those trapped in the valley. So there's the reasons from their perspective. Garbled communications, incomplete calls for fire procedures, and a lack of situational awareness on the part of those trapped in the valley. Meanwhile, during this time, you've been moving up, grabbing bodies, coming back. And here we go again. As we moved forward for a third time, the talk had finally ordered the Army platoon, Dog 3-2, to move forward. They pulled in behind us with the platoon leader in a Humvee with an anti-tank tow missile on the roof. The tow made no sense to me, but the truck was equipped with a .240 machine gun. Behind them were 20 U.S. soldiers and 4 heavily armored vehicles. You rolling with me, Lieutenant? I was confirming what I took for granted. I'll scout the route first before I bring my platoon in. The terrain may be too tough. He refused to put his soldiers into the Afghan vehicles. I could understand that. Okay, I go first, I said. You cover our 6. The Afghans will be behind you. As we bounced forward, I heard Team Monty again come up on the radio. We're under fire, Lieutenant Johnson said. We're surrounded. So now you're heading back in.
Yeah. Yeah, and my whole goal was just to get them, was to get them to the road. And, that was their goal. If they could get to the road, they could get in the vehicles. We were good. So I was trying to push. I thought that they had took over a house, right? Like I thought they had pushed into the village and took over a house.
Strong pointed a house.
Yeah, and that's what I thought they had done. And I lost communications with them. That's what I thought they had done. When Kennefic was trying to give that grid, I was trying to write it down because I knew if I could get that grid, I'd know where they were at. I could plot it, and I could be there and go get them. And the one part I don't talk about in there is probably the hardest part of the whole deal is that the first trip that I made in, I was probably 60 to 70 meters from them. They're still alive.
So you're in the valley now. You're with a group of guys. Going back to the book here, a bullet had entered Westbrook's neck near the shoulder blade and ricocheted downward, a dangerous but not fatal wound. Swenson applied quick clot powder and a bandage to seal off the bleeding. The fight had been raging for over 90 minutes, and the chain of command throughout Kunar province was on alert. Procedures for releasing helicopters had been unsnarled, and 2 OH-58 Kiowas were en route to the valley. At 07:15, they had contacted Swenson. "Highlander, this is Pale Horse." The PC pilot command radioed, "What do you need?" "Pale Horse," Swenson replied. "I am under heavy fire from the village and the hills to the east and on both sides. Request immediate suppression while we pull back." The Kiowa squadron had been in Kunar for 10 months. The pilots knew the terrain and the enemy habits. They intended to swoop in low and crisscrossing strafing runs, deliberately swerving and cutting back at odd angles. They didn't care whether they hit the Dushmen. They wanted to force them to crouch down and cease firing. The aerial tactics would allow the command group to pull back westward to draw down under reduced enemy pressure. As Swenson moved, he called for a medevac. Shadow radioed back that the TOC wanted questions answered before calling for one. "Is he Army or Marine?" Shadow said. Swenson cursed. Major Williams was more diplomatic. "This is Fox 6, Williams radioed. "It doesn't matter his service. He's U.S. There was a pause, then Shadow reluctantly radioed, "Repeat. TOC needs to know if he's Army or Marine. Yeah. It's in the regulations."
Yeah, it was...
You got a guy calling for medevac, and you're getting asked, "Hey, is the person that is the casualty Army or Marine Corps?"
Yeah, and it really did matter to them. It really did matter to them.
You're saying it mattered?
I'm saying it to who was asking. They really, their decisions were based off of who it was.
All right. At this point, I think you're going back and forth, going back in the valley, getting bodies, helping wounded, coming back out. You're under fire the whole time. Rod is getting after it with you. Sometimes you have some U.S. people with you. Sometimes you don't. And again, these are things you have to buy this book and to get these details out of it and read it so you understand the full magnitude of what we're talking about here. Going back to the book, Hafez left the command group to sort itself out, helping a wounded Askar. Was headed back west to the operational release point when I had stopped them. "I need you to come back in with me. I can't find them without you," I said. Hafez was married recently. He was wounded and exhausted. He could now go home and have a life. If today is my time to die, then I die. So he's rolling with you.
He rolled with me the whole time.
Again, to all those people out there that, well, I guess I should just say, for the people out there that have a hard time understanding what's going on overseas, here's an Afghan soldier that is now going to risk his life to help an American Marine go and find his friends.
Yeah, because we were brothers.
Going back to the book. Shortly after we headed again down the valley, we bumped into another group of wounded Askars. Rod recognized the first sergeant, who was dripping blood down the right side of his trousers. He was waving his arms, begging us to stop. 4 Askars hobbled over and threw themselves into the back seats, splashing blood all over the place. We drove them back to the collection point. The first sergeant was blubbering, begging us not to go back in. I was a little rough shoving him out of the truck. I was running out of time and patience. Once we dropped them off, we gunned it back down the track. We were getting to a place where we couldn't turn around and couldn't dodge and weave as the RPG smoke trails came at us. "We could get pretty stuck in here," Rod yelled. The truck had very little traction and absolutely no cover. "Then I guess we'll die with them," I yelled back. What else could I say? We weren't going back. Rod shifted into low gear and we bounced forward. I noticed this throughout the book. You have a hard time. Like, anytime you saw wounded guys, you were like, all right, well, we got to make another trip now. We got to make another trip. Even with those wounded Afghan guys. Like, you want to go help your guys, but at the same time, you see these guys, you're like, all right, get in the truck and we'll take these guys back. Yeah. You got a big heart, bro. Got a big heart.
I mean, look, I didn't just lose. I didn't just lose 4 guys that day. I lost 10 guys because I lost 6 Afghans. I lost 10 brothers. You know what I mean? I mean, those guys were just as close to me. My Afghans were just as close to me as any Marines I ever served with.
And that's why they're joining you to go back in there and fight.
And that's why I'm alive today. I mean, that's the relationships that I had with them, and the brotherhood that I had with them is why I'm alive today. I mean, they are incredible human beings.
So you're driving around in here. Back to the book. Only Rod's skill at the wheel was preventing me from being hit again and again. Bullets make different sounds when they pass by you. The cracks of bullets breaking the sound barrier mean they're high, maybe 5 or 10 feet over your head. The bullets that snap close by your ears are the real killers. A few, losing power and slowing down, made a low buzzing sound. Strange though it may seem, I wasn't scared or angry. I was beyond that. I didn't think I was going to die. I knew I was dead. There wasn't anything I could do about it. I wasn't a thinking human being. I had gone elsewhere. I wasn't firing the machine gun. I was the machine gun. Rod wasn't driving the truck. Rod was the truck. I had melded with my weapon. I was no more human than a 5-foot machine gun I was embracing. We were locked together, metal and flesh. Without that 50 cal, I would have quivered like the Haskars, helpless in the storm. But with that weapon, I felt transported. I had something to do until the blackness came.
Yeah, I kept, like, the bullets were hitting inside the turret. They had elevation on us. And so they were hitting inside the turret. And, man, you could hear them coming by. And I remember sitting there. Because if you get down, I mean, your instinct is to duck down the turret. Mm-hmm. But you do that, they'll overrun you. I mean, they were running at the truck. So, you duck down, they're full sprint. Mm-hmm. And you're never going to come back up. You know what I mean? And I just kept waiting for a bullet. I just knew it was just going to hit me in the face. I just kept waiting for a bullet to hit me. Lights out. Like, there was no doubt in my mind that I was going to die. Zero doubt. But I was going to make this son of a bitches earn it. They had it to do.
Check. I wasn't paying attention to the Afghan soldiers. Rod and I planned to keep driving east until we were obliterated or we found my team. Suddenly, with no warning, 5 or 6 Askars who were lying in a terrace about 100 meters away leapt up and raced towards our truck. One was shot back and pitched forward. Wham! A second man went down screaming. Wham! A third, then a fourth and a fifth. I'd never seen anything like it. 5 men down in 5 seconds. There was so much screeching and shooting that I couldn't pick out the location of the weapon that had shot them. To deliver such lethal grazing fire, the machine gunner must have been hidden only a few hundred meters away, with a clear line of sight in his bipod firmly anchored. Yet whoever shot those men didn't raise his gun sights and stitch me. I knew he was looking at me, but I couldn't see him. There was nothing I could do. He let me live. Not one of his rounds even struck our truck. I can't explain it. We used to call the trucks bullet magnets.
Yeah, they are.
I mean, it's like the ripest target. And you're the turret gunner. You're like the icing on the cake. You're the cherry on the icing on the cake.
Yeah. Because that truck gets over. If they take the gun out, that truck doesn't come out of there. It's overran.
Oh, hell yeah. Yeah.
But, even though it's a bullet magnet, I mean, just like right there, I think that kind of paints the picture. I mean, it's the only chance you have.
Right.
I mean, you're out. I mean, that's how dialed in they are.
It's.
I mean, I was literally watching guys.
People throw the term miracle around.
Yeah.
All the time. Like the fact that you right here, there's 5 guys within, spitting distance from you, and they all go down, and you're the most prime target, and you don't get shot, man.
You want to talk about helpless? The most helpless feeling you got is watching guys trying to get to you and just getting mowed down. I mean, you want to talk about helpless, and you don't even know where it's coming from. I mean, you want to talk about helpless is watching another human being run directly at you to get help, and you just watching them just go down one after the other, after the other.
Can't even imagine it, dude.
Yeah, it's just it's. They were good that day.
You get this call from Valdez. They're coming at you. I can see them closing from both sides. They're swarming you.
Yeah.
In front of our truck, I saw a few guys sprinting across the wash from left to right, heads low. I don't think they saw us coming up behind them, or if they heard the truck engine over the din of the gunfire. They scurried too quickly for me to get off a burst. Glancing to my right, I looked smack into the eyes of 5 or 6 men in dirty man dresses, crouched alongside a drainage ditch not 10 meters away. When I gaped at them, they ducked down like they were playing hide and seek. It took me a few seconds to realize that they were spreading out to seal off the open end of the Horseshoe Valley, zip-locking the frozen Ascars inside a fire sack. Rod and I had blundered into their rear. So they were about to surround everybody.
So that's what they were doing. There was a trench, and they were closing it. They were closing the gate, and that truck.
You happened to be there.
To be right in it.
Damn. Fire sack is a doctrinal term, actually, which means you're surrounded, and they're going to shoot into the sack and kill everyone.
Yeah.
We were bouncing over the rocks no faster than a man can run when a bearded doucheman clutching an AK leapt out of a ditch and sprinted after us like a man trying to catch a bus. My gun almost wouldn't swivel low enough to shoot him. The barrel was tilted down as far as it could go. I fired into his chest, and he went down like he'd hit a glass wall. A bullet doesn't blow a man back like in the movies. Either he stumbles or he falls dead. This man fell dead. Rod was yelling at me. Maybe I was hypnotized for a second by the death. There was a guy trying to open the right door. I couldn't depress the 50 cal that low. I can't get him, I yelled. The gun won't go down low enough. It takes the brain 12 thousandths of a second to react to danger. My mind was a complete blank. I had fired so many thousands of rounds that I didn't think what I was doing. Once you've practiced emotion long enough, it becomes second nature. Some researchers call it expertise-induced amnesia. Athletes call it being in the zone. I call it self-preservation. I grabbed my M4, leaned out, and shot the guy 4 or 5 times in the shoulder and neck. It was like shooting a zombie. There was no shock power in the little 5.56 millimeter bullets. He fell to the ground. I pivoted back to the 50 cal and grabbed the spade handle. The weapon, my hands, and my eyes were working as a trained unit independent of my brain. Man, sight, picture, shoot. Man, sight, picture, shoot. You don't really look at the target. The enemy remains out of focus. You concentrate on the sight picture. Man, sight, picture, shoot. I hit 1 or 2 guys next to the truck, and the others ducked back into the ditch. Valdez came back on the radio. Rod, watch your front. Rod was focused on keeping traction in the loose gravel. If the truck got stuck even for a moment, we'd be toast. He looked ahead to see a bearded, hatless man in his mid-30s dressed in a brick red man jams with a green chest rig full of ammo running toward the truck and firing an AK at us from the hip. Hold on, homie, Rod yelled. He hit the accelerator. The truck hit the man squarely in the chest. There was a bump and then another bump under the tires. Holy shit, Rod yelled. I just ran over a guy. Back up and do it again. I'd been shot in the elbow. A bleeder that did no real damage. The bone was fine. In a fight, adrenaline deadens the pain. I did a little rapping and got back to shooting. The more fucked up things got, the more Rod and I started laughing. He was steering away from RPGs, streaming at us and laughing, and I was shooting the big gun and laughing. Definitely crazy, but your emotions have to go somewhere. The enemy fire slackened on us as the Kiowas darted around. They were like a steel umbrella over us. A few minutes later, Pale Horse came back on my net. 3-3 were Winchester. We'll be back in 15 mics. Winchester meant they'd expended all their ammunition. They were too light to carry much, and they'd been shooting at targets wherever they looked. The firing picked up. We were again the pinata. I climbed down from the turret and talked to Rod and Hafez. We had started with 6 ammo cans. We were now down to 1. I had fired more than 2,000 rounds. Guys, we need a new gun, I said. It was 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. As we turned, I saw an Askar crawling feebly toward the road. We stopped and I hopped out. A PKM machine gun was tilling the ground around me, so I dodged back and forth until I reached him. One Kiowa out of ammo hovered above me and distracted the enemy, ignoring the RPG shells exploding in the air. I turned the Askar onto his back. Hit by 3 rounds in his upper chest and neck, he was gurgling and drowning in his own blood. I rolled him onto his side, and he died before I could pick him up. Yeah, like, you can see I kind of circle things that I'm going to read.
Yeah.
And I just was like circling giant chunks.
Yeah.
So people can understand what, I mean, I know that people aren't going to understand really the kind of chronological evolution and maybe the mechanics of what was happening, but I want people at least to understand until they read this book themselves the freaking situation that you were in, which was beyond mayhem.
Yeah, you know, you talk about training like to the worst case scenario. I always had done the same thing. And this was worse than any worst case scenario that I could have ever dreamed up of ever being in. It was the worst of any situation. I could have never sit here and you said, give me the worst thing you could just come up with, and I could have never done it. I could have never done it. It's just like, I just felt like everybody was dying. Like, it was just, there were, like, literally, there were bodies everywhere. You couldn't turn around and look and there not be a body somewhere.
And you just pretty much figured you were going to be joining them soon enough.
No, I did. There was no doubt. There was no doubt in my mind I wasn't making it out of there. And, I walked in that day, and this just shows you how ignorant I was. Like, when you talk about your buddy who was kind of like puffed the chest up, right? That was me. Mm-hmm. I literally, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to just tell you how ignorant I was. I walked in that day, and I there was not a situation that I was ever going to see that I couldn't get us out of. There wasn't one. Mm-hmm. There wasn't one. And it was like, it was like God showing me just how small it was. You got to take, these Afghan soldiers, they were my buddies. And part of the problem was...
How long into deployment was this?
It's supposed to have been 9 months.
And when did this happen compared to when you got there?
We got there in July, August, September.
Yeah, so this is like two or three months into deployment.
Yeah, and part of the problem was we had just done the NATO transition, and they were using weapon systems that they weren't used to.
That shoot a smaller round.
Yeah, a lot. But they weren't used to these weapons. Mm-hmm. They weren't even used to M4s. Mm-hmm.
And M4s are so much more fickle.
M16s. So yeah.
M16s are, well, even more so than an M4. M16s are so much more fickle than an AK. They must have been cursing them damn M16s.
Oh, they were. They were. Oh yeah. They they would have something go wrong and they would just drop the magazine. They would just. Yeah. So there was like I'm telling you, if you say everything, like we just hit Ramadan, so none of them were drinking water, none of them were eating. We had just, you look at every factor to this, it was the perfect storm. We had just transitioned. This is the first or second mission that we had ever went on with all NATO weapons. You look at all these factors, and it was it was perfect.
Had you ever worked with the QRF before? Have you ever done an op with them?
Not that one. I was used to the ones, up near where we were at.
But you hadn't done no interoperability with those guys before?
No, and they got shut down. So after the talk learned that it was Marines, they got shut down. All support stopped. All support stopped.
All right. Sometimes I got nothing to say, and that's one of them. I can't even comprehend that.
Yeah.